My name is Ebony Holland. I'm the Nature Climate Policy Lead at the International Institute for Environment and Development. And it's my great pleasure to co-chair this with you with Sam Green, who, if you could just introduce yourself now, Sam, that would be fab.
Hi, my name's Sam Green. Thanks, Ebony. I'm a researcher at IIED. Also wearing another hat, which is the Community-Based Adaptation Conference hat, of which I'm the program lead, and CBA is a practitioner-focused conference on community-based adaptation. I don't know if we'll do a bit more about that in a bit, but that's an introduction for now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. As I said, it's really great to have you here. We've got some fantastic speakers and what will be a great discussion lined up for the next 90 minutes. And today we're very much focused on the theme of the Gobeshona conference on locally led adaptation action. And we're particularly looking at how research can inform that action. So really looking to bring together a practitioner perspective and a research perspective. And to do this, we've brought together, excuse me, 3 adaptation practitioners and 3 adaptation researchers to engage in discussion from across different regions as well, really to get to the heart of what research is needed to support practitioners with their locally led adaptation efforts, and really what research is already available or is emerging that can really support this. So our discussion today is very much based on the principles for locally led adaptation, and many of you will already be aware of those. They are a set of 8 principles. They were developed by a partnership of peers to really help ensure that local communities are enabled to lead sustainable and effective adaptation at the local level. The principles, I won't go through all 8 of them, but certainly for our discussion today, the principles include things like devolving decision-making to the most local appropriate level, addressing structural inequalities, for example, those faced by women and youth, investing in local capabilities, leaving a legacy, and of course, a focus on collaboration and investment. And I know those themes will come through quite strongly in this discussion today. As we know, research has a really important role in supporting locally led adaptation, including in the community-based adaptation field. So it's great that we can have these practitioners here to give us their views and then engage in that discussion with our researchers as well. So in fact, what I'll do is I'll quickly share my screen so that you can see the approach for this session. Hopefully you're seeing my slide okay there. So the outcome of this workshop is to understand what practitioners need from research to expand their efforts on locally led action, and then to hear from researchers on how and what research is available to support this. Across the 90 minutes, we will kick off with a welcome as we're doing now and an icebreaker. And then we will hear from 3 practitioners who will speak for 5 minutes each around what they need from research to support their work. And then we will hear from researchers who will respond to what they're hearing and outline how research is already or emerging research can support the needs of the practitioners. And then we'll have a really fantastic open discussion amongst everyone. And we very much encourage participants at this session, even if you're not a speaker, to engage and share your questions through the chat function as well. I want to quickly just touch on the 3 hosts of this event at the moment. Because amongst these 3 organisations, they represent quite an important cross-section of both practitioners and research. So I just really want to be kind of clear about how these different communities of practice come together to really look at this action into research, a research into action agenda. So Sam, you touched on the community-based adaptation conference before. I wonder if you could just take us through a little bit more detail on that.
Thanks, Ebony. Yeah, so many of you may have attended the Community-Based Adaptation Conference before. It's been running for about 17 years. In the last 2 or 3 years, it's been online, and it is really the only practitioner-focused conference on climate adaptation around. We usually get about 300 to 400 participants, and it serves, and the community of practice associated with it serves as a an open space for innovation, sharing, learning, building stronger networks, and particularly for local level and grassroots practitioners who maybe don't normally get a chance to participate in international conferences or learning events. In relation to locally led adaptation, CBA provided the space for the Global Commission on Adaptation to launch some of its discussions with grassroots practitioners on LLA, and we've had quite a few LLA focused sessions in the last couple of years where practitioners have really helped to shape what some of those principles will look like. One of the interesting things is that we try to get a real mix. So there are a lot of practitioners, but we also get development partners and NGOs and a fair bit of the research community as well. But as we go forward, we're exploring how can the CBA conference be part of the learning journey around locally led adaptation? How can it be part of a series of events that build our knowledge and understanding and provide practitioners the skills and tools and knowledge that they need, as well as allowing them to share the knowledge that they have with others so that we can be most effective in delivering locally led adaptation. I'll just do a very quick plug while I'm here. Look out for an event in June likely around London Climate Action Week, and a 2-day event sometime around September, October. Watch this space for dates and confirmation. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. I'll touch on the Adaptation Research Alliance. And this alliance really is a global collaborative effort to increase investment and opportunities for action research, and really looking to develop and inform effective adaptation solutions. For those of you who are aware of it or maybe even are part of the alliance, it's a part of the UK COP26 presidency's adaptation campaign. So it really had a very strong presence heading into COP26 last year and continues to do so heading into COP27. And really what they're focused on is the idea that we need a new paradigm of action-oriented research to inform effective adaptation, and that includes at the local level, and particularly for countries and communities that are most vulnerable to climate change. So it might be that you or your organisation are already a member of that particular alliance. Membership is still open, so if it's of interest, do have a look at that. And then finally, the third host is my organisation, mine and many others here, Sam and others, the International Institute for Environment and Development. We're a research and policy impact organisation, very much working to build a fairer world, a more sustainable world, particularly using action, research and influence. A big focus for us is around locally led adaptation. We were one of the organisations to be part of the development of the principles that I mentioned earlier. And we really have a very strong focus across most of our work around getting finance and decision-making power down to the local level. So the discussion that we're having here today, you will indeed hear from one of our researchers more on that. And we very much continue to work with more than 70 endorsing organisations of those principles to shift those commitments into practice and action. So that's the three hosts, and hopefully that's a framing for the agenda and for the objective of today. I'll stop sharing my slide. Now, it's an interactive session today. We have our 6 brilliant speakers, but we also want to ensure that we can hear from others around this virtual table. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, May, to introduce herself and take us through an icebreaker. Over to you, May.
Okay, I've been unmuted, so I have the right to speak now. So welcome everyone to the session. My name is May Ao, and I'm a researcher at IIED. I research climate finance, and I also work on the locally led adaptation, scaling up of it, engaging with partners. And I'm here today to introduce you to an icebreaker and get yourself familiarized with Jamboard if you're not already. So there's a link that I put in the chat. Please click on it, and then I'll walk you through what you can do. I see a couple of people now on the Jamboard. So what it is, it's an interactive flip chart, and you can stick Post-its on it. And so for this exercise, we'd love to hear about who you are, what your organization is, and also your research interests. So once you're in the Jamboard, there's a little sticky note on the left-hand side sidebar where you can post a post-it note. So please put in a post-it note with your name, organization, and your research interest.
And just to add for those joining, you can find the link to the Jamboard in the chat. And I might reshare that for anyone who's just joined.
So hi, Majurul. What is your research interest? I see your post-it note. Okay, hi, Paul. You're interested in all things community-based and locally led adaptation. That's great to see. Taspia, nature-based solutions. Okay, very good. Inessa, interested in loss and damage, climate finance, action, capacity building, and SDGs. Cool. Lucia from CDKN, if you just put in your research interests as well. So after you've had a go at putting your name and organization on, I'd love you to introduce yourself in this chat to someone that has a research interest that is similar to yours. So for example, I'm interested in transparent and accessible climate finance. So let me see, maybe I'll introduce myself to Majurul, who also has an interest in climate finance. So I'll just do that on the chat right here. So if you can see my example, please find someone with a research interest similar to yours and introduce yourself to that person in the chat on Zoom. I hope that's clear. Okay, we've got a lot of IIED people introducing themselves. I'll just give a few more minutes, 1 minute maybe, and then we can kick off. So now I've not only let you guys introduce yourselves to each other, but now you know how to use Jamboard. So 2 birds with 1 stone. Okay, so back to you, Ebony and Sam, for co-hosting the event.
Brilliant. Thanks, May. That was a lot of fun. I was distracted then looking at the Jamboard. It's really good to see the range of different interests from people and also the cross sections between them as well. We're going to move now into the next session where we hear from our practitioners. I'm going to hand over to my co-chair, Sam, to take us through that.
Great. So I am going to do really short introductions to our practitioners, and I won't go through all of them at the beginning. I'm going to go through them one by one so that we don't kind of forget who everyone is. So I'm going to start with Ineza Grace, who is the director of Green Protector based in Rwanda, and a veteran of various CBAs and locally led adaptation processes in the past. Ineza, over to you to share some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me just see. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much, Sam, for the introduction, and thank you for everyone for making the time to join the session. I have a couple of slides. I'm just trying to, if it's okay, someone can support me in sharing the screen. or should I do it? You're muted,
Well,
Sam. I can't-
Sam, you're on mute.
Hold on, let me see if I can bring those.
Oh, let me just see if I can be quicker.
If you have access, if it lets you share, Ineza, please do go for it. It might be.
Okay, found them. Just for a second. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. As Sam said, my name is Ineza. I am an ecofeminist, impact-driven actor based in Rwanda, and I'm part of the Green Protector. And we are going to share with you our adaptation activities, but more importantly, on the reason why adaptation is for great importance for the youth, and also where are the gaps and some of the hope that we see in the future. So adaptation to climate change simply means, if we can break it down for how we understand it, is a way to ensure that we are able to cope with the climate change impact, but in a way that we are going to be able to have a future. Since the ambition of our country is looking on how we are going to be a middle-income country, but with the central focus on circular economy, but we are a developing country located in Africa, and we did less to cause climate change, but our community are at the front line, and we are experiencing climate change in form from flooding, erosion, and then it's destroying our hope to see a future, if I could say that one. But then when we look on adaptation, what we see is an opportunity to bring back better for a better future. So that's how we see adaptation. And for myself and my team, we came from a very diverse group. So we came from a peri-urban and rural area, but we all driven to find a way to act right now so that we can be able to deliver some concrete solution. So our solution or activity that we intend to do is around environmental education and awareness, because we also understand that the need to bring back better, there's education value that need to be associated with it, but most importantly, the public participation should be higher, because it's no longer going to be a policy-driven process, it should be an actor-based process. And we also act on project design and implementation. We do advocacy and capacity enhancement. And the advocacy side technically is all around you break it and you pay it kind of a policy for for loss and damage finance, because the longer waiting period that the world took to take climate adaptation seriously, we are now living loss and damage, and to an extent that was never recorded before. And our generation, we are going to be left with the burden to deal with it, but we didn't cause it, and we didn't have any kind of open influence on a global level on not finding a solution. So on the ground, because again, we tend to really try to do what we can so that we can have a future. So we have concrete project on the ground in the Green Protector. So one project is located in Bugesera, which is a rural area. And the project is aiming to promote sustainable water access for a resilient ecological agriculture practice for 50 members of a cooperative of women and men who are HIV positive. So this project was designed by our team, and it has a plan to be implemented in 9 months. It's already funded under the GCF. And we also have another project called the Kibirizi project, which is aiming to protect the natural forest from degradation by giving an opportunity for the youth to have an economic development. And this project is located in a 100% rural area. So this is this is a place where there's a minimal access to school, roads, health structure, or also a job opportunity. But we designed this project so it can be meant to help the community adapt to the climate change, but at the same time be associated with the economic value. The project duration is estimated to be 6 to 12 months. And the beneficiaries are around 50 people, but this project is not yet to be implemented to receive fundraising for it. So this is simply to showcase that even if youth understand that they are being actors in adaptation is quite challenging, we are still trying to do what we can, because we don't want to. There's a quote where say, if you're not part of a problem, try to be part of a solution. So we're trying to be part of the solution as active stakeholders. And then on the other side, there's also there's action that need to be happening that is go beyond locally led adaptation. So we need advocacy for climate justice, and by climate justice, we need to be reflective in the global process in a way that we are able to listen to the need of the community, but at the same time giving the opportunity for the youth to be influencers of the policies. So we are, on this, we are part of the delegation of negotiators following the climate change negotiations since 2018, but we also want to see more youth being supported to attend and to participate, but the participation should be in a not tokenistic manner. What we mean by this is a participation that is going to be able to elevate and understand the need of the youth and the concern, but be ready to risk everything so that we walk through with them throughout the space. So the gap that we saw, we see in our daily engagement is the lack of research-based evidence to support decision-making process around adaptation, because I studied in the National University of Rwanda, and I see a gap in my university being able to provide concrete data that is going to reflect the vulnerability of our community in a way that is going to be informative to policymakers and being taken to reach the international level. So that's the kind of a gap that is really problematic in my understanding, and where we are trying to see if we can also have some action to undertake so we can overcome them. And that was a short presentation, and this is a picture for the team behind. So we are a team of 5 people, and 4 female and 1 man. And in case there's any question or clarification, please do not hesitate to reach me out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ineza, for those really interesting comments. We're going to hold comments a bit later, and it's also worth pointing out that the Jamboards are there if you want to take notes or put your thoughts in. If you can just scroll along the link at the top. We're going to move straight on to our next speaker, and do hold any questions or comments for discussion later on. So I'm going to hand over now to Fatih Al Hassan. Fatih is the Executive Director of the Grassroots Sisterhood Foundation in Northern Ghana, an organization dedicated to supporting networks of grassroots women across 3 regions. So over to you, Fatih. Would you like me to share my screen, or are you comfortable doing that yourself? Fatih, we can't hear you. I can see you're off mute.
Oh, sorry.
That's better.
I fell off the line, so
Oh, Fatih, you're breaking up a little bit.
didn't get your call. Good morning, everybody. Is it clear now?
Just about. Maybe if you cut video and I can share screen so that we can see your slides, that might allow it to work.
All right, thank you.
Great.
I've gone off video. All right. Thanks. Can you please share my screen, my slides, please?
Yes, I will do that now. Okay, can everybody see that clearly? Great.
Yeah, I can
Go
see
ahead,
that.
Fatih.
Okay, thanks. The presentation I'm going to make is in the context of the northern region. I work in urban and rural areas that have history of long dry seasons with only 5 months of rain. We have recurring droughts and floods, which lead to a lot of food insecurity and loss of livelihoods. And also we have issues with lack of women's access and control to land. Our communities, we have undertaken several research work related to land and climate change and development. And most of them are around risk and vulnerabilities due to climate change, women's access and control to land, good land governance using the gender evaluation criteria. In all this, we found one common thread, and those are interlinkages between grassroots women's land ownership and reduction of vulnerabilities to climate change impact. As a matter of fact, our research activities has galvanized our communities to do a lot of work on their own issues and try to find appropriate solutions to them. In that situation, communities have been able to own the processes of research that we have taken with them. And one of such has resulted in the establishment or creation of several initiatives, which also include the Community Land Development Committee, which is a space for women to have their voices heard in land governance. Our challenge during this research has been the slow response of government to the commitments that they have made during our validation and findings, presentation of our findings, due to lack of budget allocation for grassroots priorities. Most of the times, issues at the grassroots hardly reach the central government level. And so there's a lot of, there's a gap between what we do there and how they can allocate our resources to us. In the process, we have been able to build a lot of relationships with our traditional authority. We have and other government institutions, like the National Disaster Management Organization, which has oftentimes invited us in their planning methods as well as in mitigation activities. Traditional authorities have also been able to accept a tool that we developed during, after the research that we did to ensure women's secure tenure. It's a gender sensitive land tool. It's a kind of land lease that gives security of tenure for women at our communities. And also in the process, we have been able to collect a lot of data. And recently during the COVID era, government has, our Metropolitan Assembly has used our data that we have collected in how government has provided water to rural communities in the partial lockdown that came during the COVID era. And so there is that kind of synergy between our traditional leaders, traditional organizations, government agencies, as well as what they do with the data that we collect. It's very, very important for us to, I just want to be very clear on one aspect that we are trying to get researchers to support us in, and that is where I want to put all my energy in. Grassroots women are the experts in their own communities. They gather information. We in a way validate this information with communities. We validate this information with government institutions so that they can hear and know about our issues at the community level. We also have a lot of work dealing with research organizations, especially with our academia in the universities. Most of the time, the gap is how they collect the information from us and what they do with the information from grassroots groups. We would want very, very much for our researchers and our academic organizations, academia, who come to grassroots level to gather information, to appreciate and recognize our contributions to inform gatherings in our communities. I'm on the last, the fifth slide right now, which has to do with the support that we need from our researchers. We want them to appreciate and recognize our contribution to information gathering in our communities. We want them to include our findings in their research work and policy proposals related to climate and development. Most of the activities are at the grassroots level. Whatever is done and how it is felt by the people is at the grassroots level. And oftentimes researchers pick this information and it is just out there and nobody actually knows what they do with that information. They don't even come back to validate that information with us. And so it's very important for them to come back to us, validate the information with us, and include our findings and recommendations in their research work. We would also want them to acknowledge and attribute our local knowledge and work. At the grassroots level, most of the times you will find at international levels presentations that are made and it is concerning us, and we have given that information and there is no attribution to us. We are not recognized in any aspect. That information is coming from the grassroots level and collected by grassroots women's groups. And so we are asking for an acknowledgement and attribution of our local knowledge and our work. We also want to be identified as partners in climate research and development processes. It's very important as all these things affect the grassroots. It affects our communities. And so if we are seen as partners in that research, we'll be able to offer much more local knowledge for the information that they are gathering. And we believe that that will go a long way to resolve some of the issues that we have around policy, which is always developed at the top, and there's a gap in the middle, and it does not even reach the people on the ground. And we are also expecting goodwill from our researchers. Most of the times, the information that they take from us is very, very important to them, but there is no feedback to us, and there is no goodwill even to tell us that this is what we have done with your information, and this is how or where we are going with it. So we are expecting these 4 issues to be addressed properly by our research organizations. The other issues that I have mentioned in the previous slides can be discussed when we go into the group discussion, but I wanted to be very, very specific on what we grassroots groups want our researchers to do with the information that we gather at the community level, and that we share with them all the time when they come to us for information. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It's absolutely fascinating to hear how locally generated research is informing action in practice, as well as to hear about the demands from research about being better represented, better communication between the research side and the practitioner side. Really, really important points. And I can also see in the chats some great responses coming in about the role of community research and this question about how can researchers use the data and knowledge produced by local groups, as well as recognize, communicate and exchange it. So thank you for those comments, and certainly laying down a gauntlet for researchers to respond to in a few moments' time. Before we get there, I'm going to hand over to Paul Mitchell, who is the Principal Climate Advisor at Save the Children, and thank you very much for jumping in at relatively short notice. A quick Google actually showed that Paul was involved in CBA 7 some time ago. So really going back in the archives. So over to you, Paul, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks, Ebony, for organizing and for inviting me. I'll just share my screen, and as I'm trying to get it to share, I'll say it was fantastic hearing those thoughts. Whoops, what am I sharing? Yes, that's working. No, I think I'm sharing all of the wrong things.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, perfect.
You got a blank screen?
Yeah, we've got a blank slide. It wasn't your team's. It wasn't your team's list, but now we can see your slide.
I'm sure there's nothing terrifying in my team. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, thanks for having me. And I was just saying it's really great to hear those really kind of local scale, on the ground examples of research and what's happening. Because my work often, sadly, keeps me away from that, and I kind of have to work at the macro level. And so what I wanted to talk about was some of I've got 5. I know I said 4, Ebony and Sam, but I've actually got 5 because a colleague threw one in at the last minute. Critical research gaps that we see in our work, scaling up locally led adaptation. So I'm just going to run through those one at a time. So the first one, I'm going to talk about just gaps in general. So these 5 key gaps. So the first one is the evidence gap. We know that locally led adaptation, community-based adaptation works. We have a really proud history of, 20 or more years of some incredible programming happening in many places around the world. But what we don't have, I think, is sufficient evidence to often prove, right, that it works for donors to scale up. We're in this perennial pilot mode, and we have been for a really long time. So how do we get from there to scale? And the key way, I think, is proving what works and proving that it's ready to be taken to scale. And part of that is also that donors these days often talk about innovation. They want to see innovative approaches. And how do we prove what works? And how do we prove that it's innovative before we've done it? So it becomes a bit of a chicken and egg situation. So that's often a real challenge for us. And the third area that evidence, I think, is critically important is around policy advocacy, using this evidence as a tool, particularly at the national level, to help persuade governments to invest in locally led approaches to adaptation. So that's the first one. The second one is what I'm calling the geography gap. So what can we learn from amazing research that happens in one place on one program that could be applicable in other places and other programs and other contexts? Are there things that are absolutely unique that can't be replicated, that approaches that will only work in one place? Or is there anything we can find that's universal in the way that locally led adaptation can work? My third one is bridging the knowledge gap. So we see more and more that donors, particularly the large-scale climate finance mechanisms, want actions that directly address climate change drivers. And so we get pressured to prove that every activity that we're looking to implement in every place is directly addressing a physical climate change impact or a climate driver. But the climate models that we have access to in the places that need this assistance the most are really coarse, if they exist at all. And so how do we, what can we do to localize some of this regional and even global climate data and make it useful and usable in arguing for the effectiveness of locally led approaches? My fourth one is this kind of certainty versus flexibility issue that we often see again with the large scale climate finance mechanisms, where the donor understandably wants to know exactly what we're going to do, exactly where we're going to do it, and exactly how we're going to do it, right down to detail, right down to in the most distinct detail. How many screws will you need to attach that water tank to someone's roof? What we need, though, as we develop locally led approaches, is extreme flexibility. Ideally, I would talk to donors and I would say, give me a whole bunch of money, and I will go away and work with amazing communities and do brilliant things and come back and tell you how great it was. No one's going to sign that check, at least not at the moment. And so how do we bridge that challenge? How do we maintain sufficient flexibility while giving donors the certainty that they require over the way that their funds will be spent? And again, I think that the more evidence that we can build of what works, the more that we can utilize that in terms of making arguments for scaling up, excuse me. And my last one, which will be a surprise to the researchers, sorry, because this wasn't on the slide I shared with you earlier, is this idea of translation and access gap. So where we're doing great research or where really good research is happening, how can we make sure that it's useful and usable for people at the community level or in different communities who may be facing similar challenges? Many things end up behind paywalls, or they're in English or one of the other kind of major languages, and that aren't necessarily the language that is spoken in the place that's being researched, or if they are written in a local language, they may not be written in accessible language. So how do we bridge that divide as well? That's me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. Really interesting and great to have a categorization of different kinds of research needs, which can help to organize thinking kind of across these 5 different lenses or ways of thinking about research needs. There's some really great comments coming in the chat, and I want to just pick up on those as well. So one is on the responsibility of researchers to those they are working with, which is often overlooked. And thank you also to Lucia for sharing a report, I believe from Northern Ghana, relevant to some of the comments that Fatih was making. So thank you for that. So maybe just to do a quick summary, and then we're going to hand over to the researchers who are going to respond to what they've heard. They have had a little bit of preparation time, but not that much. So they're a little bit on the spot. But we've heard from Ineza talking about some of the demands, a lack of evidence for decision-making processes around adaptation, the need for concrete data that can reflect the vulnerability of local communities and can inform policymakers, that is also brought to the international level. We've heard about the need for community level knowledge to be properly recognized and integrated and represented by researchers, that there needs to be more goodwill between local grassroots actors and researchers, and more collaboration so that attribution can be correct, and better communication so that better communication so that there is recognition of the research that takes place at local level, but also so that grassroots researchers can understand what it is that researchers that come from the outside are actually doing with the knowledge, or are they trying to validate that information? So some important findings there. And we've also heard from Paul, who's introduced 5 research needs across evidence and evidence generation, which can be used for policy advocacy and innovation, bridging geography gaps, bridging knowledge gaps, developing the right tools and methodologies, certainty and flexibility, so being able to be flexible to respond to contexts and ensure that local actors can lead, as well as translation and access, so making sure that research outputs are accessible and meaningful. So I'm going to stop there. Ebony, I hope it's okay if you can introduce on the researcher side, and the researchers are going to respond to what they've heard with a few more comments before we open up. I'll also just point out again, particularly to those that have just joined, there is a Jamboard, and I'll share the link for that. And that is a space for you to share your own comments in the slides that you'll see in that Jamboard. So please do dive in, make yourself at home with any comments, questions, and points for further discussion, or any of your own thoughts on the topic. So thanks. Over to you, Ebony.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, and just as Sam was saying, we've been starting to take notes in that Jamboard, so do dive in there and have a look at that as well. And just to thank each of the 3 practitioners for their really clear and insightful points. I think it's really set up this next discussion well for our wonderful researchers to respond. So I think we'll get straight into it. I'd like to invite David, who is in Uganda at the moment. David, if you could introduce yourself, share your screen, and then take us away with your response to what you've heard so far.
Many thanks, Ebony. My name is David Mfitumukiza, based in Kampala, Makerere University, and in the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, and also a member of LAC, and also involved in the leadership of Least Developed Countries University Consortium on Climate Change. So I don't have a presentation, so I listened, and so my speaking will be in response to what has put across as much as I can. And most of the presentations really raised very many things to think about. And mainly I would say that 2 broad things come from what is being presented by the practitioners. And I thank them very much, because quite a lot of things to deal with and also to think and work towards. The first one I see in the broad category of what they are saying is about being very considerate of supply and demand in doing research. The second one is really about partnerships, investing in partnerships and working through these partnerships so that research is very responsive to the needs and priorities of those who need research products. I think that's what I broadly see coming from the presentations that have been made, and I really think that they are very, very, very important. So in that regard, I think as researchers, there are a number of things that we need to do so that we are able to be responsive to the needs and the priorities of those who need information to make decisions, but also able to undertake decisions. I think we need to, I see us being asked to move a little bit more into more action-oriented research. I know that research institutions and universities have done action research, but the action research which in itself is not action-oriented research. So I really think that we need to move into much more action-oriented research. And also, of course, in the interest of partnerships, like I mentioned before, I think there can't be research without funders. Research institutions depend on funding from researchers. And I think for us to respond to these needs and to be sure that we are moving towards action-oriented research, I think there is need to advocate for funders, governments to reinvest in action-oriented research as a high priority. Otherwise, it may be very difficult to really drive towards much more action-oriented research. So here is we need to move much more into action-oriented research. And this action research, I think, from what's coming out, will require translation of what comes out, with what comes out of that research. And for that translation to work, I see us being asked, and I think we should be very intentional and proactive so that the research processes themselves are part of the process of translating knowledge and research products. And what does that require? That requires us engaging more and moving into building deep partnerships with those who will need research right from grassroots, implementers, policymakers, and also those who are supporting research. These two to me will call for us researchers to strengthen our brokering efforts so that in essence, whatever we do, the kind of research we're doing is linking users and producers of knowledge with having very many people in between that are facilitating brokering processes so that the knowledge reaches to those who are people. So I think that's what we need to do as researchers and as much as we can. The other thing, of course, that's coming out is that we need to improve more on integrating knowledge systems. I think that came out from Patia, whereby we seem to be thinking that there's superior knowledge. And I think this has been more or less something that we haven't been doing well as researchers, whereby if you're a student, I have had student activities where if you're not going to test a hypothesis, you may not qualify to get a degree. And I think that is something that needs to change, whereby we need to venture into doing research that, for example, involves documenting experiential knowledge with intentions of, again, linking it to action, as I had already indicated. So it could be documenting, and I think that should be looked at and valued in universities. But I think this also goes into questioning and challenging us. I think it's a challenge, like I said. I think changing the incentive regimes in universities, for example, where I come from, whereby I think we need to change the incentive regimes so that it's not really looking at what impact you have in terms of publications. I think that's what's coming out, so that we have impact being quantified into what action is brought in terms of adaptation effort where this is happening. So I think we need to do this. So if we are to create change and have research that creates an impact at grassroots level through all policy and practice levels. But the other thing, of course, to underscore is in terms of partnership is collaborative research. And I think research should not be left for researchers alone. I think, like I said before, there has to be very strong collaborative efforts, and these collaborative efforts should be on collaborative knowledge co-creation and collaborative learning. We are piloting this as least developed countries universities consortium in 4 countries. We're doing this in Uganda, in Nepal, in Mozambique and Bangladesh. We are starting an effort where we want to really emphasize bottom-up oriented research that responds to questions and not respond to theories like it's always been, responding to the questions that someone at the front line that's doing adaptation needs to be addressed, and that becomes part of the mainstream research activities in the universities. And we're in the initial stages, and we are looking forward to opportunities where we can be able to have some of the results shared in such a for as community-based adaptation, the Gobeshona conferences and other levels. So in essence, it's one of the things we have seen as a gap, as a lack, and we have embarked on an effort to really focus on collaborative knowledge co-creation, so that in essence, the learning processes are intentionally responding and working with people at the front line. So this is really around experiential learning, and this also will involve what we are calling community-based adaptation research, whereby farmer fields are being used as laboratories, for developing innovations, so that in essence, even when you have interventions being used by those who need them, they will have gone through a partnership arrangement of learning what works and how it works. And again, I want to end with a point that Paul alluded to do with certainty and flexibility. I think adaptation to climate change is a very unique area, in a sense that you are not going to say you are going to focus on results in 1 week, or results in a way that was designed a project proposal by someone who doesn't understand where the research and the action is going to happen. I think there is need for flexibility in terms of policies and funding, so that in essence, research is aimed at responding to the needed dealing with uncertainty and the flexibility required to learn with those who are involved in the adaptation process, moving beyond testing hypotheses. So I think it's very important that we recognize that adaptation, learning, and the knowledge creation require a lot of flexibility, well knowing that you need to build sustainability, effectiveness, but also and flexibility. I'll stop there and thank you very much for now.
David, that was so fantastic. Thank you so much. I really just want to acknowledge your point around the role of researchers to also include advocating with governments and funders to invest more in action-oriented research. I think that's a really important point. And I think that came out very clear as a need from the practitioners earlier. There's a lot that I could highlight from your response there, particularly around integrating knowledge systems. You used the university example. I think that also connects in nicely with some of the points that Fatih was making around ensuring that, for example, grassroots women knowledge, culture, experience is included in the research as well, included and attributed, which is incredibly important. And that researchers really need to place an emphasis on this sort of bottom-up research, and perhaps moving away, certainly in the university context that you used, moving away from a kind of focus on publishing certain numbers of reports and actually looking at the impact on the ground. It's a really rich response there from you, David. Thank you so much. And look forward to hearing more from you a little bit later as we move into the open discussion as well. I'd like to next invite Taspia Pasnim from Icad. If you could introduce yourself and provide your response. And I have to apologize to David. I made the indication that he would share his slides, but of course our researchers don't have slides to share. They're just going to speak and respond to what they heard from the practitioners. So Taspia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ebony and Sam, for organizing these fantastic sessions. I've heard all the, okay, this is Taspia. I am working as a researcher at the International Center for Climate Change and Development, and currently I'm coordinating the Nature-Based Solutions program at my center. And very much thankful to all the points that are raised by the practitioners. And those are very relevant, and thanks for David. I echo with many of his points, so I won't be repeating on the research-based action needs that he has highlighted. I'm going to first, when I was looking through the chats, I see that a lot of queries, comments, and reflection has come around in our area where there is a communication gap between the user or in the local from the researchers who are producing it. So I personally feel like that there is a gap, not in knowledge production or knowledge dissemination, rather knowledge or research communication. I personally feel like that as a researcher, when we are working, when we're collecting data and analyzing something, there is still a gap that these ideas or the results that we are producing back are not taken sometimes to the local communities. So I really personally feel like that there is need for an institution. And I would share an example of that in this regard, that what we are trying to do. And we are very happy to say that we are actually piloting that through the Adaptation Research Alliance that Ebony has highlighted in the very beginning as well. So what Icad is doing to bridge the knowledge gap between from the local to the the top level, like who are generating the data or generating the knowledge. So basically, Icad, International Research Institute for Climate and Society, IRI, Center for International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMMYT, and Bangladesh Meteorological Department. We are actually trying to build an academy where people from all the stakeholders can come, and we can have a dialogue around these needs, research needs. And interestingly, we have actually delivered training course through this academy, which we're calling Bangladesh Academy for Climate Services. And through this academy, what we are trying to do is that we actually bring, let's say, for example, like aquaculture. When we are seeing that people are involved, farmers are involved in the aquaculture in the local communities, we actually bring them into the Bangladesh Met Department office, who are actually producing this local and climate-based weather data. And actually, we wanted to bridge the gap that where the local people can share their problem, and the people who are generating data, producing data, can listen to them, not via us, but directly from them. And we actually trying to reach as the facilitators. I actually personally feel that there is a need for having institution or academy to have this source of dialogue. Secondly, I would like to point out another point is that the importance of knowledge co-production. We always sometimes feel that the researchers and practitioners, we take our own hat and we actually try to amplify the work that we are doing. But actually, it's very important that when we work on something, when we are trying to solve a problem, it has to be co-produced. And this is the, I think, heart or core of the ARA, that the ARA is trying to do through their micro grants, basically trying to co-produce. And it's basically very important to bring this to bring these local challenges and local problems through the lens of like co-production from different stakeholders. It's very important as well. And finally, I'd like to say that like to bridge this gap between the users and the producers, I personally feel like that there has to be a need for trust and behavior change as well, so that no one can, like, there is, yeah, we always tell that like top to bottom or bottom to top or something like that. There has to be a behavioral change in the mindset change, so that this breach can be, this gap can be breached actually. So I'd like to stop here, and I'm happy to answer any more further questions I would hear. Thank you. Over to you, Bunny.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Taspia. You've just raised so many important points there, just as David did, particularly around ensuring that communication between the researcher and the community is really open, built on trust. There's an emphasis on co-production, and really fantastic to hear about your possible plans for the Academy around climate services and creating that space for collaboration and dialogue. Yeah, really fantastic, Taspia. Thank you very much. I'd now like to hand over to our final speaker for this session before we move into an open dialogue. May is a researcher at IIED. We've already heard from her a little bit, but May, if you could take the floor, introduce yourself again, and take us through your response to what you've heard from the practitioners. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is May, and I'm a climate finance researcher at IIED. So I'm really blown away by some of the comments and responses from what everyone is saying. I think that one of the issues that has been highlighted and is close to my heart is about the westernized institutions that are causing some of the issues with that are highlighted about not being able to uptake locally led knowledge into educational institutions, the lack of researchers from developing countries that speak the languages to engage in dialogues with communities and to promote locally led research from their areas. So the problem that was identified is, I believe, the structures, the westernized structures and the incentive structures that cause educational institutions to not include local research in their curriculum, to not educate the young generation about the rich information from local and traditional knowledge within their country context. And also the incentive structures that David mentioned about KPIs on publications, on getting money from donors that are Western. So these are some of the issues, and also having to teach in English or in Spanish, not in local languages. Those are some of the problems identified within research institutions. So as a researcher, what can we do about this? So one of the things that we can do is try to understand curricula from research institutions all around the world, from developing country institutions that teach climate change. Are they teaching research methodology that is culturally sensitive, that takes into account the needs of local communities, indigenous communities, and those kinds of voices and perspective, and not about implementing and testing hypotheses as we are taught in Western institutions. The other thing that we can do as a research need as well is to identify some of the incentive structures for researchers. For example, are researchers incentivized to promote knowledge only if Western methodology was applied, to speak at conferences, to publish papers? Are these the incentives rather than incentives that meet local needs, like how much are they giving back to the community? Are they working with local governments to promote that knowledge? Those are the kinds of KPIs that we can look into across developing country research institutions all around the world. And last but not least, we can also look into how national and subnational governments are working with research institutions, not just academia, but also IIED and other research think tanks and other organizations. How are they taking that research and bringing that to a decision-making level? We can try to map out these different research ideas and also how that research is translated into policy across different countries to understand really what is the role of research in decision-making on climate action. So these are my ideas so far, and I'd love to hear what everyone else is thinking as well.
Thank you so much, May. Again, another really rich response, particularly wanting to highlight the points that you raised around the practical challenges that many researchers face, particularly receiving funding from the global north and operating in that system which prefers English as the kind of main language, and other barriers that can get in the way, I suppose, of really bringing in that local perspective, local culture, knowledge, lived experience, etc. We have about 20 minutes left together. What we'd like to do now is to move into an open discussion, really with all 6 of our speakers coming into the spotlight, so to speak. And what we want to do is kick off with a really important question that Anwesha has asked in the chat function. Anwesha, I don't know if you want to ask it, if you would like to come on and ask it yourself. I'll just pause for a moment to see if you'd like to do that. Otherwise, I can ask it on your behalf.
Yeah, thank you, Ebony. I think my question it was more pointed towards David. And maybe others can also join in saying what are some of the opportunities to really enhance the collaboration between communities who are actually collecting this data and information, who have this real-time data that can that can bring about many policy decisions around adaptation. So how can we enhance the collaboration between the research communities and the researchers and the local communities who actually collect data on ground?
Should I go for that question?
Yeah, go ahead, David. And then if anybody else wants to speak, you can use the raise hand function. If you click reactions and raise hand, then we'll know that you're lining up to add a comment. But go ahead first, David.
Yeah, many thanks, Anwesha, and thank you, Sam. I think that's a very brilliant question. Actually, it's one of the things we have identified to be very important. Now, I'll speak from the university's point of view. We have hundreds and hundreds of students going through universities, and most of these students are expected to do research. And from the adaptation point of view, one of the things we have decided to do is to have these students who do research to do research that has been identified with the specific targeted communities. I largely work with farmers. And so we have two phases of choosing the research that you do. You go with learning questions at the first stage, and from those learning questions, you come up with a specific question that you want to address in your research. And what happens is that now the student will then go to work with the communities in undertaking that research. And that way we see that linking communities through research, through students with universities is going to be a very strong opportunity of doing collaboration in as far as research is concerned. And we are doing this, or we have planned to do this with the local governments, so that in essence, there is that linkage between the research happening with the communities, what we call community-based adaptation research, and with that research can be able to connect with activities and the work that is being done with the community. So we see it as one of the opportunities, so that in essence, if you are going to do research, how is that research responding to the needs and the experiences of the people who need research? And I think with this, we have many opportunities to learn and strengthen our collaboration with communities, in this case farmers, but also with local governments who are part of the support system for the farmers I mainly deal with. I'll stop there for others to speak.
Great, thanks, David. Taspia, your hand is up. Just before you go, I'm just going to remind everyone that the Jamboard is there for you to share your own comments and thoughts. And there are a number of questions on there, and we will come back to it at the end as well. But partly it helps us to make much more visually interesting notes. And also, if you're not getting a chance to speak, it also creates a space for you to knock out some of your comments. So please do use the Jamboard. Don't be shy. I will share the link again in the chat. Please do get along and have a look. If you click on the top, you can scroll along to the different slides, but it really helps us to make sure that none of your thoughts get lost or missing in the discussion. Thank you very much. Taspia, over to you.
Thanks so much. I would like to actually share a point that David has mentioned, that how they're also working with the universities, like how universities can play more role in this regard as well. Basically, under the academy that we mentioned, we actually are working with 5 universities from both public and private, and we are actually trying to work with the faculties of those universities just to see that if their curricula is updated and are advanced to tackle the information and if they are teaching like advanced climate services or climate information. So we are actually trying to work with these universities to co-produce the knowledge, to co-produce the modality of what are the core courses or topics that are needed to be taught by the teachers for the students, so that the students can take more of a like more can do more advanced research on their arena. So that's a very interesting approach that we are taking, and we are hopeful that that will be beneficial for the universities and for the students as well. And then they can actually, because they are working, we have taken local universities and we have universities from national level as well. So there is a bridge between these two as well. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Taspia. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Sam. I just want to add, given the increasing interest in research around communities' approaches to adaptation or community needs, coupled with the fact that it's difficult to travel these days for a range of reasons, some related to COVID and others, but also that people working in a university in one place may be interested in issues that are surfacing in another place and may not be able to move around. But I was thinking that another possibly a really useful and interesting source of information for this kind of research, particularly comparative analysis type research, is adaptation plans that are increasingly being developed at the community level by a range of organizations through a range of mechanisms, often project-based. But those, they tend to look similar in their structure, the kind of capacity and vulnerability assessment process, as participatory as possible, leading into a kind of a long list and then a short list of the kinds of adaptation actions that may need to be undertaken. Looking across a range of contexts or within similar contexts in different places at the content of those action plans would be really interesting, particularly if that could be coupled with then the kinds of investments that get made, and do they reflect what's in those plans or not, I think would be a really interesting way to unearth some of these really interesting correlations too. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, and as somebody myself who develops guidelines on how to develop those kinds of local plans, I think that would be really important, because the plan is great, but then what happens, and how do you integrate the plan into decision making? And as you say, take a wider spread of many different plans and use that as a research tool. I think is absolutely crucial. Great. Any other comments? We've heard in terms of opportunities for linking research at the local level. We've talked about universities, and we've also talked about local adaptation plans. I'm wondering if anyone has any other additional thoughts on that particular topic, or if not, any further questions for the speakers to pick up on.
We have a hand raised from Manjuro.
Great, go ahead.
Are you able to speak, Manjuro?
I need to unmute, that's why. Manjuro, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes. I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I'd like to talk about the LLA topic. That is actually I think that there is a gap to understand about the LLA, because I found that many of students actually willing to conduct research on this topic, but sometimes they have a lack of understanding, and they have also mixed up with the community-based adaptation also. So I think if universities are initiated the learning process to incorporate this issue in the learning, so that if students understand fully the true meanings of locally led adaptation, more research can be conducted in the academic level. So it will be generated more micro level knowledge, but it will contribute in broader level, I think. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. some further comments in the chat, and one of my favorite things to see is connections being made around the role of universities through local governments and opportunities to document experiences and share learning with other universities. So recognizing that this work shouldn't happen in silos, that there is a research community out there that can share influence within countries, but also across countries as well, and inform the work of others. Great. I'm wondering if anybody has any further questions or thoughts on this issue, or maybe looking in a slightly different, taking a slightly different angle and thinking about, somebody mentioned the phrase knowledge brokering at one point, and it can be something that means everything and nothing if we're not careful. And I'm wondering if there's any thoughts on how could knowledge brokering between local actors and researchers happen perhaps more effectively, or are there any particular initiatives that are working well that we could learn from that can inform the way that we move forward? Anybody from the panel want to try and pick that one up?
I can try to make a crack at it.
Thanks, go ahead.
So I think there are some things that have already been mentioned by some of the panelists on what a knowledge broker should be. I think Taspia mentioned that they are setting up an academy that is trying to broker the knowledge between governments and also local actors. And as research organizations or even international organizations, I see our role as being a knowledge broker, one that tries to be neutral and tries to uplift the voices of grassroots actors so that they can be connected with their subnational governments or national governments more. Rather than a knowledge broker is supposed to be a neutral entity that tries to lift the voices of those from the bottom and also connected with decision makers. And maybe perhaps also the knowledge broker helps in refining key messages for the different actors that are involved, rather than put in their own perspective on what they want to see happen. I think, Lucy, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, the definition could also be seen much more broadly of knowledge brokering. So more like creating these avenues for different types of sectors or stakeholders to come together and really discuss what are either their burning issues or what are like the research gaps, what type of knowledge is needed, what type of knowledge people already hold. Because, and it's not only necessarily, I think, of the grassroots communities, it's also really the experiential applied knowledge of maybe the local government technician that is working on like agricultural extension, or the engineer that has been implementing the rainwater harvesting. So I think it's really bringing together and creating a place where people can come and share their knowledge, share their responses to the problems. And therefore then the research is much more targeted, because you see like, okay, we already know so much, these are the gaps, let's go and fill those gaps and see who can fill them. And in some cases it's the researchers, but in other cases it may be that it is the technicians or the practitioners, the NGOs that are able to quickly gather what is needed to move forward. So I think what we're seeing is that, yeah, there is a real mismatch sometimes between the type of research that is undertaken that is to such levels of depth and theory that really it loses complete relevance for those who are battling every day with the climate challenge, and what instead could be good enough research to solve the problems that are like burning us because we literally are at that stage. So I think I think what I see as a role of these brokers, which I think is quite a problematic word, but that we are using even as CBKN, is really to be these intermediaries, conveners, facilitators, matchmakers, where people come together and we look at what is needed and discuss it.
Great, really fascinating input, Lucia. Thank you. And it was called to mind one of the key messages from the CBA conference last year, which was there was a very large demand on particularly the international NGOs to be less implementers and play more of this knowledge brokering and convening role, to sort of get out of the way of the practice and do more of the sharing and facilitating. And that really picks up, I think, on that message. I wonder if I could pitch another question. We've heard quite a lot today about the role of local governments in shaping practice at local level, in the kind of staff that they have, the local level technicians and extension workers who are on the ground. My question is, to our knowledge, often, what is their current engagement with research? And what do you think are the most effective methods to continue to work with them to incorporate their knowledge as well as deliver new innovative approaches to them as well that they can use? I wonder if anybody has any thoughts specifically on the role of research in informing local government staff.
I was going to share my thoughts. Let me open my camera. So for me, I think sharing on again my perspective, I think the role really relies on tapping into the existing opportunity with the local researchers, in getting them the tools and knowledge that they require so they can be able to actively meet the demand from policymakers. What I mean is that, for example, sometimes what the policymakers need as evidence to support their demand on international level is not being effectively transformed as an academic course that is going to be available for students to follow in the engagement, and the new researchers or junior researcher on the ground in the country will not having the same guidance that is going to be useful for the policymakers. So one way to go around is to meet policymakers in the country and understand their true needs and involve the academia on the very first stage, so they can tweak their curriculum to incorporate those needs, so that they have an open room for new researchers who are going to, yes, try to do the research, but at the same time being able to produce information that is going to be taken up, because otherwise, because sometimes you find what you learn in school is not what you really need on the ground, and then what is needed on the ground is not what is being reflected in the decision-making process. So if it can be a way to bridge that gap, I think to be useful. That would be what my thought around it. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ineza. There is another comment in the chat I'll just pick up on from Lucia, just drawing attention to some work of the advanced studies in Nepal about using responding to water challenges with researchers and local governments, and a publication, a toolkit there. So thank you very much for sharing that. I do encourage everyone to take a look. We're just coming down to the final few minutes of the session, and I wonder if anyone on the panel, maybe we can ask panelists to share perhaps a few final reflections, maybe just your hottest takeaway in 30 to 45 seconds, if you're willing. And I'll also encourage participants in the session to take a look at the Jamboard. There is a final slide, which is what are your key takeaways from this session? And it's very sadly blank. So please do take a look. You can even do that after the session is over. We can keep the Jamboard open for a little while. So please do use this opportunity to share your thoughts on the Jamboard, and May has shared the link. So panelists, does anybody want to go first with maybe your hottest takeaway from the session? Paul, do you think I can pick on you? And then Taspia?
Yeah, sure, Sam. I mean, I think my hottest takeaway is there's a real openness, obviously, on I wouldn't want to say both sides, because I think we're all, all researchers are practitioners to some degree, and all practitioners are researchers to some degree, whether we want to call ourselves that or not. But I think there's this discussion and many others that I have all the time shows there's a real willingness that researchers don't want to be doing research that isn't useful, and practitioners don't want to be doing things that don't work, or that or having to relearn lessons over and over again, or do the wrong thing repeatedly. And so I think that there's a real increasing willingness to be meeting in the middle and to be working out the best ways to make these fundamental transformational changes that we really need to see happen all around the world. So it's been really heartening. So it's been a fabulous session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Taspia.
For me, my best takeaway will be that when we do research from the ground and take that to the national level or decision-making process, we really need to take the message back to the local level. And I would like to echo with Paul that so that the things that are going wrong in the local level can be, we can overcome those challenges. So yeah.
Great, thank you so much. May, any takeaways from you?
Yeah, I think that what I've learned from the practitioners is there is a lot of good research activity already at the grassroots level. And it's just a matter of connecting the formal research space with those that are not traditionally considered researchers, like grassroots organizations, like Fatih was saying. There's already so much good evidence out there already, and we just need to connect these two communities so that they're working hand in hand rather than seeing each other as different sides of the table. Fatih, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you.
Fatih, you're still on mute.
Wow. Okay.
That's better.
It's okay now. Okay. What I'm taking away from this discussion is that researchers are acknowledging that there is a gap between the way we gather information and sharing it, and how they also pick that information and whatever they do with that information in our regard without us. And I'm happy that they are acknowledging. What I would suggest will be that at grassroots level, we also acknowledge that we have our own limitations, and our own limitations will also include resources to be able to do high level advocacy with the information that we have than what the research institutions will be doing. And so we would want to have that collaboration with them. We are willing at the grassroots level to be partner you at any level during the information gathering, during the analysis, during validations and sharing and whatever you want to do with it. They would also want to go one step with our researchers when the presentations are being made to whatever institutions is commissioning that kind of research. So that in a way, we would also be building our own platform, building our own knowledge, and building our own basis on how we would also be able to do research that will meet the needs of the research institutions. So education is also important, collaboration is important. In whichever way, it's a win-win situation for both of us, because we are all struggling to bring about the change that is going to affect all of us. So for me, this is what I take away from this, and I'll be sharing this on a larger scale with my network members.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Fatih. David, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so very, very interesting and insightful session and discussion. And I would want to say that, like economists say, demand is always an important thing. We can see that there is demand for research, and we also see that there is supply, but I think there is a mismatch. And I think mine is to the practitioners. I think we need to move this further and continue raising the demand, because you see, research is funded. Researchers, I'm involved in research, but I don't fund my research. I have hardly gotten funding for an idea I've come up with that has not come from someone who has money and says calling for call for a proposal. So one, I think we needed to really raise the demand so that in essence, people will know that if they fund research or they do research that does not meet the demand, there is a problem. And I think probably we need to also have had another part of the discussion, the funders. I guess the next time we have this discussion, we may want to look at another angle, which is the side of funders, because essentially we would want to see what would that mean in terms of flexibility and being responsive to the demands, rather than kind of coming up with ideas that probably are not tested against the demand. So the thing here is the demand and advocacy for demand, and also influencing the research agenda, wherever there are decisions pertaining to research and research funding, we need to really raise that demand and influence that agenda all around that. I'll stop there. Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you so much, David. And I think that leaves Ineza for the final word. Ineza, any final comments from you?
Thank you so much, Sam. It's really hard to find the right word to say after, because I agree with what each of the speakers said. But I would just say, for me, what I'm taking forward with is the fact that, yes, research is needed. And yes, now the global research friends and group, they are all acknowledging that more need to be done. And now is the right time for more active inclusion of youth researchers, because they also want to be part of the process, and I believe it's going to be possible. And then again, keeping the hope that what we are striving for we'll be able to achieve in a short time of period, because we don't really have time. And I'm just more confident that we are all ready to act together as soon as possible. Thanks. And I also thank you for organizing the space. I think it was really amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't have any words to top that, so I think I'll just finish by saying thank you very much to all of our panelists for a fantastically rich discussion. Thank you to May and Anna for taking really great notes and facilitating the Jamboards. And thank you also to Gobeshona for creating this space for us, and the IT and tech team for making it all run very smoothly. I hope all the participants have found this an interesting discussion, and of course we'll be keeping the notes for the future. And I'm also happy that there are new questions emerging for future sessions, so that we can continue to build on the conversation. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.